Text, Virginia Minor, Part 3 with Ranger Kathy. A woman in a high-collared blue 1800s-style dress stands in front of a judge's bench.
Welcome. This is the third and final installment of the story of Virginia Louisa Minor.
Color portrait of soldiers on a Civil War battlefield.
The Civil War ends. And when it ends, there is a tragedy that happens for the miners very soon after it is over. And that is the death of their only child, their son, Gilmer.
Sepia tone drawing of a rural area.
He's killed in a shooting accident. And they live out about 6 miles from downtown. Their property, near their farm, Menoria, there was a shooting range. And you've got to kind of wonder, is that where the accident happened? But these folks are absolutely grief-stricken. And that is when they're going to turn and start to support women's rights, especially the right to vote.
Cartoon of several people gathered near ballot box. Sign reads, vote for the celebrated man-tamer.
Why? Maybe because between the two of them, Frances and Virginia Minor, have 5 nieces. And maybe they just want to help women in general get the right to vote. That to them is the most important thing. Once you get the right to vote, other things kind of fall into place. If women have an impact, have an influence, they can get laws changed so that they can own property in their own name, that they can buy and sell inherited property, that they can control their own children. And so they start to work on women's rights. And we're going to see that in 1867. There's going to be an organization formed. It's called the Women's Suffrage Association of Missouri.
Woman at conference table addresses a group.
And Virginia Minor is elected as the president. And before that, she had heard that a man by the name of...
Photo of suited man with long dark beard.
B. Gratz Brown had supported suffrage for women as well as freed slaves. And he comes back home, and in the meantime, she's written him a letter of thanks, and she's taken it around, and folks have signed it. And they've sent it to him when they give it to him when he arrives back at St. Louis. Then we're going to see that she is going to get 330 some odd signatures on a petition.
Text on screen. We therefore pray that an amendment may be proposed striking out the word male and extending to women the right of suffrage. From Virginia Minor's petition to Missouri State Legislature, 1867.
That is going to go to the state legislature of Missouri, and it asks that women be added to the 14th Amendment, which talked about all citizens having rights, and that as citizens, women should also have a right to vote. The problem with the 14th Amendment and why they opposed it initially is tucked into that 14th Amendment, there's a requirement that talks about men cannot be denied the right to vote, and if they are, a state could be punished. And so they are going to be worried about this. They're not happy with the 14th Amendment, but Frances Minor is going to eventually look at that amendment and decide, this can help us.
Old photo of Mercantile Library.
In 1867, Virginia Minor helped form the first group in the whole world that wanted one thing, and that is women's right to vote. They formed the Women's Suffrage Association of Missouri. And soon she is going to join a national movement called, join the National Women's Suffrage Association. And this is a group that is led by Susan B. Anthony.
Photo of Susan B. Anthony.
And so she is starting to get involved in this. She is going to be working to get women the right to vote, and they're going to look at the 14th Amendment for their help. They also look at the 15th Amendment, and they are trying to get this right to vote, because if women get the right to vote, everything else is going to fall into place. They will have an impact. They will be able to control their own destinies. They will be able to, if they are voting, they can get legislators who will vote for things they want. And we're going to see that Frances Minor is very supportive of his wife's efforts, and that they are going to be very much a team. They're even going to travel to Kansas to encourage the state legislature there to vote in favor of women's suffrage. As a member of the National Women's Suffrage Association, Virginia Minor is protesting against women's inferior status, that they are no longer willing to put up with that they are not willing to pay taxes if they don't have the right to vote, and their thought is that the place where this could be settled is at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Photo of 1800 Supreme Court.
And so that is where they're going to start putting their efforts towards getting a case where they can get a case to go to the Supreme Court. And so in 1872, we're going to see that women are going to be trying to vote. And it's because of her husband. He had written a pamphlet, it had circulated throughout the country, and now he is a supporter of the 14th Amendment, where originally, because it doesn't mention women, he opposed it. Now he supports it. And this is called the New Departure. And they are going to use that amendment to get women the right to vote. So, in 1872, there's a presidential election, and all over the country, hundreds of women tried to vote. Susan B. Anthony up in Rochester, New York, with several of her sisters and other women, actually go and vote. But a few weeks later, she is arrested for voter fraud.
Sepia cartoon of Susan B. Anthony with patriotic top hat.
And she is going to wind up with a trial where the judge has already made up his mind about what should be done. And so he fines her $100, but he never tries to collect it. And so Susan B. Anthony is following Frances Minor's ideas that they want this thing to go to the Supreme Court. You got to have a case. She's got no case. Here in St. Louis, it's going to be different, because in 1872, Virginia Minor went to the registrar's office, and the registrar, Reese Happersett, refused to register her to vote. Why? Because she's a woman. And in the state of Missouri, only men can vote. So they're going to sue him. And they're going to sue him for $10,000 worth of damages. Why? Because if they win the case, they can be able to push for women to get the right to vote, because a court is going to say, yeah, you were denied your rights, Mrs. Minor. But if they lose the case, and they do, they can appeal the case. And it will wind up at the U.S. Supreme Court, which is their goal. And so 1872, she tried to register, is denied, they sue. The case goes to the Missouri Supreme Court after there's a trial in a court here at the old courthouse where she lost.
Photo of old courthouse.
And so they appeal it to the Missouri Supreme Court that used to meet in this building above us, actually. And her husband, Francis Minor, is the clerk for the Missouri Supreme Court. And he either was pressured or he decided to resign so there'd be no conflict of interest charge. And so he's no longer a clerk for the Missouri Supreme Court, and they appeal and they turn her down because in Missouri only men can vote. They go to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1873-74, they're going to wind up at the Supreme Court, and they're going to contend that women are protected by the 15th Amendment and especially the 14th Amendment, that they should be able to vote. And that is when the Supreme Court comes along and says, no, you don't have the right to vote, ladies, because the states decide who votes. And in Missouri, only men can vote. So she comes back to St. Louis. Her lawyers had been the same all through her trials, all three levels.
Photos of two bearded men.
There was a man by the name of Crum and Henderson, and her husband, Francis Minor. And so she loses. What is she going to do? The rest of her life, she and her husband are going to devote to trying to get women the right to vote. She goes to give speeches, he does writing. At some point, after they lose their Supreme Court case, I've read that Francis Minor goes deaf. And so it's her turn to be very supportive of him. And they work very hard. And in 1889, we're going to see that she testifies in favor of women having the right to vote in front of a Senate committee.
Photos of Virginia Minor in Capitol building.
And they were impressed. They thanked her very much, but they don't move on giving women the right to vote. So, a few years later, Francis Minor is going to die. 2 years later, 1894, Virginia Minor has settled her husband's estate. You know, things that women aren't supposed to be able to do, she can do. And she did it. And she will then die of an abscess of her liver in 1894. And in her will, she left $1,000 to Susan B. Anthony to thank her for all of her support in the cause for women's rights. She leaves $500 each to two of her husband's nieces. They are single, and they get the money on the condition that they never marry. If one of them marries, the money goes to the other sister. And then there are also other folks that are going to benefit. The newspapers of the time, surprisingly, published her will and make it like how shocking this is. But she also takes care of other relatives. They have 3 married nieces, and she will leave them money. She will leave a nephew money, and she will leave money to her house servant. And that house servant is going to get a month's pay in addition to what she earns in the month when Virginia Minor has died. And she also leaves her a gold watch.
Photo of gold watch.
And with that gold watch, I personally wonder if it's not her husband's. Because when back in 1846, he put all of his property in a trust for her, amongst the items listed is his gold watch. And so I think to the very end, she is trying to help women. Even a woman who had been a servant in her home. If necessary, that woman could sell the watch if she was, financially in, dire straits. And so she works all of the rest of her life for women to get the right to vote. Does it happen while she's still alive? No. Does it happen while Susan B. Anthony is still alive? No. But she did honor Susan B. with a bequest of $1,000. And so it is not until 1920 that women are going to get the right to vote in the 19th Amendment. And this year, we're celebrating the anniversary of the adoption and placement of that amendment into the Constitution. Thank you.
Logo, NPS Arrowhead. Text, Gateway Arch National Park, St. Louis, Missouri, 2020.